Anthony Albanese has begun the huge task today of rebuilding and repositioning the Labor Party with a telling observation that Australian voters have conflict fatigue, as he put it. He's flagged a new era of bipartisan cooperation where possible, and obviously conflict where necessary. Whether he lives up to that, we'll see. These sorts of promises have been made before. We've heard them about a kinder, gentler polity. But Labor has been humbled at this election, and Anthony Albanese certainly accepts it needs to respond to the will of the people and win back their trust. And that, he says, means coming up with solutions, not just combat.
I am a values politician, but I also say this to Scott Morrison. I'm not Tony Abbott. People want solutions, not arguments. They have conflict fatigue. Some reforms require bipartisan support.
Conflict fatigue. We'll see what happens. Now, the first test of bipartisanship that he's talking about there will come when Parliament resumes, probably in early July. The government will no doubt bowl up the tax package it took to the election as first order of business. Labor, we know, is willing to support the first stage of the tax cuts, those for low and middle income earners, but it's yet to agree to the tax cuts some years from now for those on higher incomes. Will Albanese maintain the rage that these tax cuts are unaffordable and on the never, never? That was certainly Labor's line through the campaign. Or will he now show some bipartisanship on this? We'll see. Today, his leadership truly began. Nominations for the job closed, and his was the only one. So he takes the job without the need for this month-long ballot process. But as he said today, it wasn't exactly uncontested. Labor's right faction tried to find a candidate. A number tested the water, but none were viable. None were willing to even try their luck, as it turned out, aware that the rank and file of the Labor Party is now solidly to the left of even where the caucus is at. Chris Bowen, of course, pulled out of the contest last week, declaring that he would have at least won the caucus vote, he said, but not according to the new leader, Anthony Albanese. He won't get to prove it with a vote, but Albanese is confident the numbers in both the caucus and the party membership are on his side.
I have been elected to lead, but I pledge to always remember that we are also here to serve all Australians. I come to this position having done no deals, no arrangements. I have put myself forward on my merits, and I've received the support, not just of the party, but of the caucus as well. A clear majority of the caucus, and a support from the party. Of course, that was never tested, but anyone who thinks this has been uncontested hasn't been paying any attention at all.
This was a new leader projecting confidence, trying to show a bit of authority. He can't determine new policy positions until he has a shadow cabinet in place to consult. And he did signal today that he would be in no rush to announce policy changes ahead of the next election, pointing out it's still 3 years away. But he did put down a couple of important markers. He wants to keep pressure on the government over Indigenous recognition in the Constitution and also action on climate change. Now, on the first of these issues, constitutional recognition, we know this carries bipartisan goodwill, but it will be a difficult one to land in practice. The second issue, climate change, well, that's been the most bitterly fought partisan issue of the past decade, and that is clearly not about to change. Despite at least one of his senior frontbenchers, Tony Burke, suggesting a move away from a market mechanism to tackle climate change, Anthony Albanese today made it very clear he still believes that's the best way to give business certainty.
Let me say this unequivocally. The science is in, climate change is real, we must act. Not just as a nation, but as a global community. So I am neither a climate sceptic, nor am I a market sceptic when it comes to action on climate change, because I have listened to business and sat down with them.
Now, Anthony Albanese, together with Labor's faction leaders, now need to work out who will be on the front bench and who will fill the most senior roles. As we go to air this afternoon, there are still a number of moving parts in all of this. Richard Marles will become Deputy Leader when the caucus meets on Thursday here in Canberra. There will be no other candidates. And as Deputy, Richard Marles can choose his portfolio. And everyone knows where his passions lie. Foreign Affairs and National Security. He has served in the defence portfolio under Bill Shorten, but most expect he may not want to necessarily push the highly regarded Penny Wong out of the way in Foreign Affairs. So where will that leave him? He'll want something senior. As Deputy Leader, he'll be able to take it. There is a chance he may move to Treasury, but it's just a chance. Most do believe the more likely scenario is Queenslander Jim Chalmers stepping into the Treasury role, where that would leave Chris Bowen and even Bill Shorten, who is likely to stay on the front bench, is still unclear. One thing I can tell you this afternoon is Queensland will retain its current numbers in the Shadow Ministry. There's been a bit of talk about this. Despite losing seats in the Sunshine State, there will be just as many Queenslanders on Labor's front bench. Shane Newman won't be dropped, despite some speculation. The party knows it needs to rebuild in Queensland. Can't just do that with Victorians, South Australians and others. It needs to keep those Queensland numbers in the Shadow Cabinet. There's still a bit of a question mark too over who becomes the Deputy Senate Leader. Don Farrell is currently the Deputy Senate Leader, but Christina Keneally may be coming into that role from New South Wales. Again, we know she will be in the Shadow Cabinet, and Labor will be determined to have more women in its frontline, prominent roles than the government, particularly now that we're going to have a Leader and Deputy Leader in Albanese and Richard Marles, both men. It's going to want to show that it does have more women, particularly in those frontline roles.